G'day. What I've got here today is a lawnmower that's really not living up to its claims. Supposedly an easy start lawnmower. This is a Honda 4-stroke and it has an overhead valve engine. A friend of mine has asked me to have a look at it. It's having difficulty getting it started. What I'm going to do is share with you some of the troubleshooting steps that I'll go through. One of the first things we need to check when we're troubleshooting a 4-stroke engine that won't start. It might seem kind of obvious, but sometimes this can get slipped. Does the engine actually have fuel in it? Which in this case, there is. Engines like these with no battery electrical system use a magneto for their source of ignition. The first thing I would always troubleshoot, check if there's any spark. Ignition systems typically have a high tension lead which is very easy to remove. One of the first things you can do when you're troubleshooting an engine like this is whip that spark plug lead off and check for a spark. The spark which an ignition system puts out is generally in the range of 20 to 60,000 volts depending on the application. Can be more, and it's going to want to jump the easiest route from the high tension lead, which is here. There's a conductor inside the high tension lead. By putting a screwdriver in there, we give it an easy path. Place the screwdriver near the ground of the engine. The spark will want to jump across the gap somewhere here. If there's a spark, we should be able to see it and we should be able to hear it. You can quite easily see and hear that there's a decent spark able to jump across a good 10mm gap in open air, which would indicate an output probably in the range of 20 to 30 kV. What I'm going to do next is pop out the spark plug and see if there are any clues as to what's going on inside of this engine. Reading the spark plug is something that can be done on any piston engine that has spark plugs. One of the first things that you can also notice when you take out the spark plug, was it snugly tightened? Because if it's not, you could actually lose compression past the spark plug. When I was turning the engine over, I couldn't feel any loss of compression. What we're looking at here is the business end of the spark plug as it came straight out of the engine. This is the center electrode. This outer surface here is actually a ceramic insulator. The spark jumps from the electrode here onto the other electrode here, the ground electrode, which as you can see is welded back to the body of the spark plug. So this provides the route to ground for the electricity to complete the circuit required for the spark to occur. What we're looking at here is a fairly soiled spark plug, not severely soiled. If we can get a good visual down inside this spark plug, you can indeed see some lumpy buildup around the inside of the insulator. I'm going to start to scrape some of it out. As you can see, I've got a ground down hacksaw blade, an aluminium little handle, which I solid riveted together just using a hammer and a vise. This little spark plug tool has been with me since I started fixing aeroplanes back in 1995. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use that to see if I can dig out some of this gunk that's inside of this spark plug. You can see it's coming off really easily. This looks like oily deposits. That's most likely come from the fact that the mower is a little bit old. There might be some more oil getting past the piston rings or past the valves. This is my spark plug post cleaning. I'm going to stick it back in the engine and see if we can get a bit of action from it. If you're one of those engine manufacturers who make spark plugs very difficult to access for the normal user shame on you. Spark plugs should be readily accessible for any user. Be very careful when you're installing the first couple of turns of the spark plug. The last thing you want on any engine is a cross-threaded spark plug. That will ruin your day, I can assure you. And definitely do not over-tighten your spark plug. These are another frustrating thing you'll find on a lot of lawnmowers, a pull start that doesn't retract fully. But usually when the engine's running, the vibration of the engine will draw that cord back in. Rightio, I've cleaned the spark plug and put it back in. Pulled the engine through a few times, and so far there's no joy. I'm going to take that spark plug back out again, look for a sign that it's wet to see if fuel appears to be getting into the cylinder. The spark plug looks to be pretty dry, so the next thing I'm going to look for is to see if any fuel is making it into the system. Stick that spark plug back in, take off the air cleaner and have a little look at what's going on in there, if anything. The air cleaner of an engine is another thing that should be really easily accessible. You should be able to get to it without any tools or with minimal tools. Alright, the air cleaner looks pretty tidy. Not too much dirt and gunk in there. Unfortunately, you can't see too much down into the throat of the carburetor with this air box sitting there. There's a pretty good way to isolate if there's a problem with fuel getting to the engine. That's actually to introduce some fuel into the carburetor. So that's what I'm going to do. And I've got a can of the old Start Your Bastard here. Give that a little bit of a spray down into the throat of the carburetor. Doesn't need much. Then I'm going to pull the engine through a couple of times and see if it actually tries to cough and splutter into life. What was interesting about this is that additional little bit of help from Start Your Bastard got the thing going. And what I noted straight away was that the engine will run nicely with the throttle in the choke position. As soon as I lowered the throttle back, the engine would stall. Here on choke, I'm running happily. Here on high, I'm not running at all. So just to confirm that, I'm doing this whole procedure again, and I've just pulled it through a couple of times with the throttle in choke position. And it wouldn't start. Now I've given it a little bit of the go juice. With the throttle now, I'm finding if I put the throttle into the choke position, there's nothing much happening. If I slot it back into the high position, the engine still continues to run, but as soon as I knock it off the high position, to put it back to idle, it's just stalling immediately. Because the throttle is behaving like this, before I start pulling too much more apart, I'd like to see if the throttle is actually opening all the way or not. We've obviously got this little governor here which controls over revving of the engine. This little quadrant here which controls the butterfly. I'm probably going to have to take this little air box off. What we're looking at here, the throttle cable where it comes into the throttle quadrant here. I'll take that air box right out. Down below here, this looks like a air-driven governor, which stops the engine from over revving. This actuates the throttle lever here. And I'm just going to take a look at what happens when I move the throttle lever up here, which is currently in the low position and now in the stop position. And I'm going to move it fully forward. So this is the fully forward position. and this is the choke position. My question is right now, is the throttle cable moving all the way to where it should be? Because it looks like there's quite a lot of pressure here. Let's back off this cable for a minute. That actually wasn't very tight. I think the throttle cable has slipped down, stopping this from retracting the cable all the way up into its correct location. Over here, you can see that butterfly valve, which is open, and when I push it just that little bit further, closes that butterfly, indicating that that's the choke position. What I'm going to do now is adjust that cable into this position here, tighten the retaining screw, it looks like I've just had a technology malfunction here. I'm going to press on regardless with the GoPro footage. I'm now going to operate the throttle cable again, and this time I want it to come into the choke position, which it now has done. I can release that. This is the off position, this is the high position, and this is the choke position. Alright, let's give her another try. Rightio, putting the whole thing back together. Put this thing back together. It's time to see if the Easy Start Honda is easy to start once again. Which of course it is. Thanks for watching. See you next time.